Welcome to the Savage Executive Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Smith. Whether you're running a company, leading a department, or building your first team, this is where faith-driven leaders come to sharpen. This is wisdom for the weight that you carry. Let's get into it. I want to start somewhere that most leadership content avoids. The moment before the decision. Not the strategy, not the framework. The moment when you are sitting alone with the weight of what you are about to do, and you are afraid. You are afraid of making the wrong call. You're afraid of losing key people. You're afraid that financial shortfall will be worse than the numbers show. You're afraid that the organization you've poured yourself into might not survive what is coming. And if you're honest, you are sometimes afraid that your faith is not as strong as the speech that you gave last Sunday. That fear is not weakness. It is information. And how you process it, how you move from fear to faith in a way that is honest rather than performative is one of the most important leadership skills that you will ever develop. Faith-driven leaders carry an additional burden here. We feel like we are not supposed to be afraid. We quote Isaiah. We preach courage. And then we go home and we lie awake in the middle of the night running worst case scenarios. And the gap between the faith that we preach and the fear that we feel becomes its own source of shame, which means we are not just dealing with the original problem. We are dealing with the original problem plus guilt about how we're handling it. And today, I want to close that gap. Not by telling you to stop being afraid, but by giving you 5 moves that let you lead faithfully through the fear without pretending it is not there, and without letting it make your decisions for you. So let's dive in. Move number 1 is to name the fear specifically. Vague fear is paralyzing. Specific fear is manageable. The difference between I am afraid things are going to fall apart, and I am afraid we will miss payroll if quarter 2 revenue does not come in at 90% of projection is enormous. One is a fog that follows you everywhere. The other is a problem with a boundary around it. And boundaries are where leadership begins. Most leaders avoid naming their fears specifically because naming them feels like giving them power. The opposite is true. A fear that lives in your chest as a general sense of dread has unlimited power over you because it has no edges. A fear that you name precisely, put on paper, and examine analytically has a defined shape. And defined shapes can be worked with. The act of naming is the first act of leadership in a crisis. So this week, write down your biggest fears about your, not general categories, but specific, concrete, time-bound fears. Then look at each one and ask, is this a probability or a possibility? Is this based on data or on anxiety? What would have to be true for this fear to materialize? And what can I do right now to change those conditions? Move number 2. Separate the decision from the emotion. Fear degrades decision quality. Not because fearful leaders make irrational choices, but because fear narrows the solution space. When you are operating in high anxiety, fewer options. You discount longer time horizons. And you are more likely to choose the option that reduces your immediate discomfort rather than the one that best serves the mission. The discipline is to create deliberate space between the emotional state and the decision. Not to deny the emotion, but to give the analytical brain room to work without the emotional noise drowning it out. Sleep on it. Write the options down rather than holding them in your head. Talk it through with someone who is not emotionally invested in the outcome. The decision made after that space almost always looks different from the one made in the heat of the fear. The best leaders I know are not less afraid than other leaders. They are better at not letting fear make their decisions for them. That skill is learnable. It starts with recognizing the difference between the fear and the decision and refusing to treat them as the same thing. Move number 3, return to your principles. One of the most practical functions of a well-articulated organizational philosophy is crisis navigation. When the ground is shaking and you don't know which way to move, your principles are the fixed points, the things that are true regardless of the circumstances, the commitments that do not change when the environment does. For faith-driven leaders, those principles are layered: organizational values, personal convictions, and theological anchors. In a crisis, all 3 levels matter. What does our mission require? What do my convictions demand? What does my faith say about this moment? A leader who has done the pre-work of articulating their principles clearly before the pressure is applied can move quickly and decisively even when circumstances are uncertain. Wisdom, in this sense, is the accumulated clarity of principle setting done in the calm. Move number 4, shrink the time horizon. When you are afraid, the future looks enormous and the present feels insufficient. The scale of the problem overwhelms the scale of the resource. One of the most practical moves available to you is deliberately shrinking the time horizon until the present capacity is sufficient for the task. You may not be able to solve the annual budget shortfall today, but you can make one phone call. You can have one honest conversation. You can cut one unnecessary expense. You can send one email that opens one door. None of those actions solve the whole problem. All of them represent faithful stewardship of the present moment. And faithful stewardship of the present moment is the only mechanism God has ever used to change a future. What is the one thing within your current capacity that you can do today? Do that. Trust God with tomorrow. Then do it again tomorrow. Crises are not resolved in a single heroic act. They are resolved through the consistent accumulation of faithful small moves. Move number 5, lead visibly. Your team takes their emotional temperature from you. When you disappear, when you go quiet, when you close your door, stop communicating, they fill the silence with their worst case assumptions. A leader going silent in a crisis is a leadership failure, regardless of what is happening internally. And the organization that loses faith in its leadership during a crisis loses the capacity to navigate it effectively. Leading visibly does not mean projecting false confidence. It means showing up consistently, communicating honestly about what you know and what you do not know, and modeling the composure and faith that you want your team to operate from. You do not have to have all the answers, but you do have to be present. The leaders who earn the deepest loyalty are not the ones who were never afraid. They are the ones who were afraid and they showed up anyway. Over the course of my leadership, there have been many moments when the weight of the decisions seemed overwhelming. Real fear begins to set in. Waking up at 3 a.m. becomes a normal, everyday occurrence with desperate thoughts about the impact that those decisions could have either way. I remember early on the decisions of implementing a true functional budget that was going to ask for budget cuts. This would impact operational expectations of people that had been comfortable doing things a certain way. We all went through COVID and the immense pressure of balancing the life of the organization with the commitment of your staff. There have been many other situations or a mounting of situations that almost feel desperate over the years. For me, once I begin to recognize that pattern, I always start with our first principle. Name the fear specifically. Normally, it's a series of things that individually would be fine to carry, but collectively, they are adding a level of fear that is unhealthy. I list all of them together so that fear has a name. That move alone helps me to begin to separate the decision from the emotion. Looking through the list as we apply our core values, the principles that we live by, some of those decisions become much easier. The ones that can be made right then, I make and we move on. Now the list becomes much shorter. It may be one or two items that are still on the list. It's at this point that I begin to shrink the time horizon. As leaders, we're supposed to look at the impact of our decisions into the future. However, sometimes that can be paralyzing. I'm a big believer in lead and lag measures. Sometimes we need to focus on the leading activity that we believe over time will have the lag measures that we desire. If we only focus on the lag, it can keep us from making the best decision. And through it all, lead visibly. Even when you are facing fear, your team needs to know that there is a steady strength. Faith-driven leaders know that strength that I'm talking about isn't necessarily an inner strength. It's a God-given peace and strength that we know that He will get us through this temporary space. There's something specific I want to say to the faith-driven leader who is navigating a genuine crisis right now. Not just organizational pressure, but the kind of sustained difficulty that makes you wonder whether you heard God correctly. Scripture is full of leaders who were afraid and led anyway. Moses at the Red Sea, Gideon with 300 men, Nehemiah building with a sword in one hand and a trowel in the other. The pattern is consistent. God calls leaders into situations that exceed their capacity by design, so that His presence and provision are visible in the outcome. The fear that you feel in those moments is not evidence that you are in the wrong place. It may be evidence that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. And that the next chapter of the story requires something bigger than what you can produce on your own. Faith-driven leadership, at its most authentic, is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to advance anyway, in dependence on one who is not limited by the circumstances. Name the fear. Move anyway. That is what faith looks like with skin on it. Here's the savage takeaway. Faith is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to lead anyway, with your eyes open and your principles intact. What we just unpacked is the discipline of wisdom, one of the 5 disciplines inside of the Savage Advantage playbook. Information is cheap. Wisdom is rare. The 5 moves that we walked through today are not techniques for eliminating fear. They are practices for processing fear in ways that produce wisdom rather than paralysis. Wisdom does not come from certainty. It comes from principle, from experience, and from a willingness to keep moving when you do not have all of the answers. Isaiah 41:10 says this, "Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness." This verse is not a promise that difficulty will not come. It is a promise that God's presence precedes the difficulty. I am with thee, present tense, already there, before the crisis is resolved, before the fear dissipates, before the outcome is clear. The strength, the help, the upholding, these are not contingent on the outcome. They are available right in the middle of it. The leadership implication is significant. You are not navigating this alone. The weight you carry is real, but the one who called you to carry it has not left the building. Faith-driven leadership at its most practical is the decision to act on that truth, to make the phone call, have the conversation, present the options, lead visibly, in dependence on a presence that is greater than the problem. Fear not because the ground has not stopped shaking, but because the one holding the ground is greater than the shaking. Lead from that position. It is the strongest one that is available to you. This week, name your 3 most specific fears about your organization. Write them down. Not categories, but precise, concrete statements. Evaluate each one. Probability or possibility. Data or anxiety. Then identify one single action that you can take this week to change the conditions around your most significant fear. Schedule the conversation you have been avoiding. Every week that you delay, the cost of having it goes up. Schedule it before the end of the week. And here is the diagnostic question from the Savage Advantage playbook for this discipline of wisdom. Could a smart stranger predict your next major decision because your principles are that clear? Take that question seriously. Let me ask it again. Could a smart stranger predict your next major decision because your principles are that clear? Write your answer down. It will tell you more about the health of your organization than most assessments ever will. The Savage Advantage playbook is available free at savageexecutive.com. These are 5 disciplines with real life strategy. Can I encourage you to download it today? Put the framework to work. Download your copy at savageexecutive.com. And if this episode has sharpened your thinking, can you share it with a leader who needs it this week? Subscribe wherever you get podcasts so you never miss an episode. Next week, the courage to confront, because the conversation you're avoiding is costing you more than what you think. That's next week. This is the Savage Executive. I'm Steve Smith. Lead with excellence, steward with faithfulness, and carry the weight with grace.